Well, thank you all so much for being here. Yay, Veg Fest! Woo! Always love it. This one is long running. This has been going on, gosh, a long time. How long?
23rd year.
Yeah, 23rd year. Isn't that incredible? It was one of the OGs, the original Veg Fest. Now they're everywhere. So fantastic to be here. So this is a story about how you can teach an old dog new tricks. Absolutely. You know, and it was of course because of the pandemic, and I'll get into that. But I hope that this is inspirational to you, because I started this podcast knowing nothing. I mean, I'm not good with tech, not good with computers, none of that. And somehow I figured it out. And we'll talk a little more about that. But first, let's see if I just hit this. Is this good? We're gonna go back in time through my history. I've been vegan and doing this work I've been vegan for 32 years, doing this work for those 3 decades. And, I started out in the 90s actually doing environmental activism and then moved into animal rights. If we could maybe close those doors, there's a lot of noise. Thanks, Greg, appreciate that. So back in the 90s, my activism was very radical and intense. I did protesting and lockdowns, and we blockaded slaughterhouses and did all kinds of wild stuff that nobody knows about because we didn't have social media. So kids are lucky these days; they get to put all that stuff on the social media, and then people actually know what they're doing. We didn't have that back in the day, but this was a Fur-Free Friday where we actually did make the paper. This is the San Francisco Chronicle, 1997, and that is me locked down there with lock boxes where you kind of handcuff yourself into a metal pipe and get locked down for hours while the police department and the fire department try to figure out how the heck to free you, and it's a lot of fun. So that was Fur-Free Friday. So that was my activism through the 90s. Now, as we went into the 2000s, the movement shifted towards food animals that were raised and killed for food. And I shifted my activism to that as well, to vegan education. I've done tons of leafleting, tabling. I've worked for 2 national nonprofits, In Defense of Animals and United Poultry Concerns, over a 15-year span, working for both of them. I've also done a ton of events, organizing events like this, and also speaking all across the country at other events. This was at the Asheville Veg Fest in North Carolina. I used to speak at the Animal Rights, when we had it, the National Animal Rights Conference every year since 2006. Was the first year. And I wrote a book. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called The Ultimate Betrayal, Is There Happy Meat? And this is about what I call the humane hoax. Humane washing, greenwashing our food, all those labels like cage-free, free-range, organic. I broke it down, did personal investigations going to these facilities, and I put it in a book, which is now so dated, I can't believe it's been 10 years since I wrote that book. And I have been organizing events all this time. Started at little potlucks up in Sonoma County. They grew and grew, and I organized the Conscious Eating Conference in Berkeley. Some of you may be familiar or remember the Conscious Eating Conference. For the last 10 years, I organized that in Berkeley. Also the Sonoma County Veg Fest, as Greg mentioned. This was our 9th year. It was actually our 8th one because we missed 2020, but it was our 9th year. So now, if someone had told me in the beginning of 2020, how much of your job is in-person events? I would have been like, oh, I don't know, maybe like 60, 70%. Well, the pandemic taught me that it was 100%. It was 100% of what I did. Either I was going to speak at someone else's event, or I was going to table in an event, or I was organizing an event, and they were all in-person events. I had no idea. So, it was really a shock when the pandemic hit, and, it was like event after event after event, cancel. We did sneak in the Conscious Eating Conference February of 2020. It was the last one I did, and and people were asking me, "Oh, are you going to cancel because of this coronavirus thing?" And I was like, are you kidding? Do you know how much work this thing was? There's no way I'm gonna cancel this. And then about a week later, boom, it just hit. Everything, cancel. And I just sat there like, what is going on? What am I going to do? I had been so busy. I was like, 6-7 days a week, all speaking, organizing, the whole thing. And then suddenly I'm just sitting there with nothing going on. I couldn't believe it. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by. I'm like, what do I do? The animals are still suffering. The animals are still, being tortured and killed. That hasn't changed. What am I going to do? So I had to really go in and rethink my life in a way, because that's the work that I had been doing for 30 years. So I knew that, of course, I was going to have to move online in some capacity. This was a very, very scary thought for me. At that time, I didn't know what Zoom was, I never had spoken online and never done anything. It was all in person. My activism, I had nothing, we barely had a Facebook page, and that was about it. So it was very scary. I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I loved podcasts. I listened to podcasts. I was an avid listener of many podcasts, both vegan and non-vegan podcasts. And, I had always wanted to do radio. That was like one thing that I thought would have been a fun thing to do through my 30 years of activism if I'd had the opportunity to do a radio show. I thought that might be fun, but the opportunity never arose. But here, now, in this new, wonderful world of citizen journalism and do-it-yourself, we can create our own radio show. It's called a podcast. It's fantastic, just incredible. So podcasting, of course, is really growing. We can now be citizen journalists, content creators. There's here I'm gonna and what was born was dun 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 dun, the Hope for the Animals podcast. Podcasting is really growing. 120 million podcast listeners in the U.S. just last year. Forecasts show that the number of listeners is going to surpass 160 million by 2023, next year. 424 million podcast listeners worldwide. So a lot of people are into podcasts. 41% of the U.S. population listen to a podcast at least once a month. And this is the part that I really liked about it, is that the average age of a podcast listener is 18 to 35. It's really reaching a younger audience, and that's something that is very difficult for us to figure out as an activist community. How do we reach the young people? How can we get the message to them? Because generally it's people later in life that are making the changes, that are, it seems to be easier to reach out to them. They're the ones that are more drawn to vegan activism sometimes, but that is changing, luckily. That is very much changing. And this is a way, I think, that it's a great way that we can reach younger listeners. All right, so there's numerous aspects to podcasting. I'm not going to get into a lot of technical detail here, but first, of course, is the concept. What kind of podcast would you want to do or listen to? I break them into three categories. One is the interview, where you're actually interviewing people, and this is the type that I mostly do. The second is news, where you're kind of doing a newscast or a story, and you bring in clips and short audio pieces that add to that. The third is the rant. I call it the rant podcast, where it's just one person just kind of ranting on, right? And also the rant can be a duet, a couple of people ranting together. Great example is The Bearded Vegans, one of my favorite podcasts ever. The Bearded Vegans, incredible podcast. Unfortunately, they stopped making them, but there are years and years of archives that are still out there. Great podcast to listen to if you're looking for a fun rant podcast. The Bearded Vegans is a great rant one. So, of course, I decided on interview style. Interviews, I'm always so enamored of vegan activists. and they're just so inspiring, you know, amazing things that people are doing. So, and just real quick, on the technical side, this is what I'll say. Once again, I'll say, I personally knew nothing, absolutely nothing about anything tech, about audio, any of that. I didn't know computers hardly at all. I was very, 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 you know, kind of a Luddite in that I don't even really want to know. But of course, for the animals, I will learn these things, and I just taught myself. And you know how I taught myself? YouTube tutorials. Thank the gods for YouTube tutorials. It's amazing. You can type in anything. How do you start a podcast? You know, that's what I did. And then you get like 20 videos, and I'll look for the 5-minute ones. You know, I don't want to hear someone going on for 45 minutes. I'll look for the 5-minute one, right? Short ones. And that's how I learned. How do I audio edit? You know, it was a very slow process, but I figured it out. And I do it all. I do everything from inviting the guests, interviewing the guests. I interview them on Zoom. Then I download that Zoom MP3 file to an audio editing software, GarageBand. I just use GarageBand. It's already on my Mac. It was already there. And it's great. And you know what else? Apple support. When you call Apple support, just be like, GarageBand help, please. I need someone who knows GarageBand. They'll totally transfer me to someone that knows GarageBand. Apple, help me make my podcast. And then also the graphic design. Again, I had to teach myself. I taught myself Canva and how to make all the graphics and everything. And then you have a hosting site. You need to have a hosting site if you're going to have a podcast. First, because the content is just so huge. You're going to have tons and tons and tons of audio. But so they host that, they keep all your files. But what they do is that when you upload your latest podcast to them, then they upload it to Apple and Spotify and all those others. You just have to do a one-time setup, and then they will put it out to all those listening apps. So it's really easy. I use Buzzsprout. There's a ton of different ones. So that's kind of the technical side. I'm now on my 67th episode of the podcast. And yes, yeah, there it is. Awesome. So this is a screenshot of my website, and the hopefortheanimalspodcast.org. And if you go there, one of the drop-down menus is called episodes. And I have all of the podcasts categorized into different, subject matter. So if you're interested in the environmental impact of animal agriculture, I've got all the environmental ones there. If you're interested in fishes, learning more about fish and fishes and fishing, I have the ones that are about fish in that category. So if you want to dig into one particular kind of issue, you can do that with the categorization. I've had some wonderful interviews. It's been amazing. Here's some local heroes here. If you see in the upper right-hand corner, that is Elizabeth Young of Palomacy Pigeon Rescue, and she does amazing work to this day. That is my most popular, most listened to podcast for some reason. Everybody wants to hear about the pigeons being rescued. Down in the lower right-hand corner, that's Deb Bloom of Goatlandia up in Santa Rosa. She rescues goats and other animals. She just recently bought a barbecue restaurant. It used to be a barbecue restaurant in Sebastopol, and she's going to make it a vegan pop-up restaurant. If we could close that door, that'd be great. Okay. And then Erin Wing. This was an amazing interview. This young woman had done numerous undercover investigations of, terrible, terrible industrial farming places. When she was I interviewed her, I think she was like 22 or 23. She had already done several investigations. She even investigated a salmon farm. She went into a salmon farm and did an undercover investigation of a salmon farm. So fascinating stuff. That's a great interview with Erin Wing. And then also these guys are here. The Eco Sports footballs, non-leather footballs. They're here at the event. Okay, I like to focus in on chickens and fishes because we don't give them enough attention. So I try to focus on them. I did an entire micro-sanctuary series last year. And micro-sanctuaries is kind of rescue on a smaller scale. So it's not the big farm with, lots of acres and cows. Generally, micro-sanctuaries are much smaller, focuses on smaller animals, mostly chickens. And micro-sanctuaries are just really amazing. They are inspirational, and these were some great interviews. Also with fish. Up in the upper right-hand corner, this is Gwendolyn Church. She has a fish rescue. Friends of Philip Fish Rescue. She actually rescues fishes. So fascinating interview with her. And then Mary Finelli has an organization called Fish Feel. So some really great stuff around fish and fish advocacy. Anti-oppression activism. So I really believe that the oppression of humans, the oppression of animals, all oppressions are connected. That all the animals will not be free until all are free, I've felt this strongly for my whole activist career, and wanting to help in the suffering of both non-humans and humans. I feel it's critical to our movement, really critical to our movement, but I didn't really know what to do and how to help in this area. It was always like, I'm not sure exactly what to do, how to make that connection. The last Conscious Eating conference that I did in Berkeley, if anyone remembers, in February 2020, right before the pandemic hit the fan, that one was focused on anti-oppression and diversity in the movement. But then, of course, like I said, everything ended. But the podcast has really given me an opportunity to feature these voices, to lift these voices up. And so I try to do as many of these kinds of podcasts as I can, want to be able to amplify these voices as much as possible. There's a lot of great work being done in this area, in the movement, that we just don't hear enough about. So I try to feature it as much as I can. If you know of a guest that might be great for me to interview in this area, please let me know. I would love to get more of these kinds of interviews going. And another area that is close to my heart is spirituality. Spirituality is, like I said, important to me, especially Eastern spirituality, but any spirituality. So I have some podcasts around this, not a lot, but some. I personally actually am right now teaching a 6-week course called Ahimsa, Animal Advocacy and Veganism at a Jain college, an online Jain college called Arihanta Academy. Jainism is one of the 3 main Dharma traditions. You've probably heard of Hinduism, Buddhism. Jainism is another. And the thing about the Jains is they take nonviolence, Ahimsa, the concept of Ahimsa, just to the next level. That's their main focus, their main tenet is ahimsa, non-violence, and they are really embracing the vegan thing. Like they are loving it. This Jain Academy actually reached out to me and asked if I would teach this course on veganism at their Jain college. So I'm so honored to be teaching this course. We're going to be in the last week next week, but it'll be again, I think, offered again in the spring. Anyway, so you can listen to more. This down in the lower right-hand corner, Dr. Christopher Miller is also a professor at Arihanta Academy, and he is a Jain as well that is vegan and doing vegan education work, connecting Jainism and veganism. All right, so this is a quote from my podcast. Some people say vegans are annoying or judgy. Were the suffragettes annoying? Were the civil rights activists judgy? I think it might have to do with what side of the issue you're on when someone moves from annoying to a change maker. Thank you. One of my better moments. And the really cool thing about podcasting too is it's like the best of me. I get to edit out all this, something I said dumb and the ums and you don't know that. But you think maybe I'm like totally smooth and, that's the cool thing about podcasting, right? And audio editing. So my podcast is sponsored by the Hope for the Animals podcast. Right, is sponsored by Compassionate Living. Compassionate Living is my nonprofit, and just to talk a little bit about my nonprofit, I have a table out in the outside area. Love you to come by and check it out. Not only do we do the podcast, but we have our Humane Hoax Project. So hopefully she's going to get her phone soon. Go to voicemail, goodness. So the Humane Hoax Project is, again, I think I talked about it earlier, it comes off of the book that I wrote about the humane hoax, all those labels, cage-free, free-range, organic. We are exposing the humane washing and greenwashing of labeling, marketing in the animal agriculture industry. We do 2 conferences. We have the Humane Hoax online conference as well as the Humane Hoax chicken webinar. It was the very first webinar focused entirely on chickens. We started that 2 years ago. It'll be our 3rd year next year. And it's just a great project that we're building on right now. We have our Facebook page, we have our website, we have a whole team that is kind of making plans for next year. I also edited an anthology that's coming out next year in April that is called the Humane Hoax Anthology, where I collected articles from academics and activists really thinking deeply about this issue of the humane hoax. So you can look for that in April. And then also, I started the Ahimsa Living Project. Again, Ahimsa and Eastern spirituality is very, very important to me, very dear to me. It has changed my life personally. I used to be a very angry and anxious activist, but digging into this stuff, this Eastern spirituality has helped me a lot. It's helped me to feel a lot more, I don't know, just centered, and it answers a lot of questions that I had. So anyway, it's a fun thing to dig into. The Ahimsa Living Project, we have a website, ahimsa-living.org, that goes into all 3 Dharma traditions. You go to the website and there's the track to Buddhism, Hinduism, or Jainism, where it connects to veganism. We're going to have a conference next year, online conference, connecting these issues of Eastern spirituality and veganism. And I always end my podcast with the question, what gives you hope for the future? I always love to ask this question, and it's amazing the variety of answers I get. In fact, there have been some people that I didn't use their answer because they didn't have a lot of hope. And that's understandable, you know, it's a crazy world. It's horrible what's happening. But I like to end on a happy note, and sometimes it's hard to get that out of people. But for me, I do have a lot of hope. I mean, it is my namesake, but I think my mom knew that I needed it, you know. So I meditate on it a lot. And, you know, for me, of course, there's the things that we think about with, you know, the amazing food, just being here, having so much interesting, incredible, different foods. You know, I have a 30-year perspective on this thing, okay? I went vegan 32 years ago. Let me tell you, when someone says to me, well, I don't know what I'd eat now. It's so, you know, there's not a whole lot. I'm like, ha, ha, ha. Whoa. Okay, so, you know, yeah, anyway, it's great. It's great that we have all these options, vegan donuts, vegan smorgasbord. I love that. I love that so much. And just the inspiration of people that are, you know, dedicating themselves to this stuff. It's incredible. But even on a subtle level, things have changed like dramatically. Back 30 years ago, when I told someone I was vegan, you know, first of all, they probably didn't know what it was. They'd be like, what? You know, they don't have, if they did know, it was a negative reaction in some way. Oh, always, like 100%. Some negative reaction, either a snarky comment or a snuff or, you know, always a negative comment or reaction to that. That is not the way it is now. That has changed dramatically. Now you tell someone you're vegan, and often the response that I'll get is, you know, oh, well, we don't eat a lot of meat, right? Or oh, I drink oat milk. And while to vegans, this can be kind of really annoying, still, it can be annoying, it's wonderful. I love these reactions. You know why? Because they're saying, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. I should be vegan, but I'm not. But I'm trying. That's what they're saying. It's beautiful. So things have shifted incredibly over 30 years. We have come so far. We certainly have a lot further to go, but the momentum is there. We're going to get there. We're going to see a world free of human-imposed suffering on animals. I believe that deeply. It's generational work. We may not see it in our lifetime, and that's another beautiful thing about this work is that, we're doing it for the animals, not for ourselves. So anyway, yeah, let's see. What else? Oh, hey, help me get the word out. One of the best ways, every time I'm like, how do I get more audience? I type in questions like this to Google. How can I get more audience to my podcast? The number one thing is word of mouth. It's your listeners. They're the ones that are going to tell other people about it. So helpful. So help me, please, to get the word out. If you listen on a listening app, doing the ratings and reviews is so helpful. That bumps up the algorithm, like in Apple Podcast and stuff. If you don't do the listening apps and you're just listening on the website, you can just share on your social media. At the bottom of every single one of my podcast individual episode pages, right at the bottom, there's a Facebook and Instagram button that you can just press, and it'll take you to your Facebook so you can share it. So I try to make it easy for you. So please help me out. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone who might be interested. I have these cards as well. I'll leave them up here, and I have more at our table for you to check it out. I have, like I said, an archive of 67 podcast episodes now. I have a series too, I forgot to mention. It's called the Reason for Vegan series, and it's a series of 10 episodes that is kind of like for pre-vegans, new vegans. It kind of breaks down the ethics and environmental stuff. So if you're just wanting to get some in-depth, good information, straight vegan information, the Reason for Vegan series is great for new vegans, pre-vegans. All right, and I will end it with this quote, another quote from my podcast. The threads of animal agriculture will start to unravel the more we pull on the strings of animal sentience, animal experience, animal emotion, and speciesism. Thank you. All right.
Awesome, thank you.
How are we on time? I don't even know.
Yeah, we get to,
We're good?
We're fine. Yeah.
Okay,
Questions?
do some questions.
Mm-hmm. It's not a portable mic, so you have to speak up.
Okay, so I listened to the most recent episode of your podcast last night, so I enjoyed that. Your different philosophies, and also hearing how you met, which is interesting. I was wondering, it's obviously the podcast is doing an amazing job of getting the word out about the issues. I was wondering, do you also fundraise through it for your organization? Like, do you run ads for other?
Yeah.
Or is it primarily getting the word out?
Yeah, it is sponsored by Compassionate Living, so it is connected to my organization, Compassionate Living, although I have been resistant to do ads. I've been approached actually by vegan protein companies, like protein bars and different things, and even there was a vegan body care cream stuff, I don't know. Anyway, people wanting to, being willing to pay me money to talk about their products. I don't feel comfortable with it yet. I don't know. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll get desperate and get there. Hopefully I won't. Hopefully, Compassionate Living will raise enough money to be able to keep the podcast going. That is the idea. I would rather it be that way than having to monetize the podcast. When someone goes to donate, it's to Compassionate Living. I don't have Patreon. I'm not getting the money myself. It's going to Compassionate Living. So. Yeah, I don't know. When I'm listening to another podcast and suddenly the person's like, yeah, and there's this great protein powder, la la la, and I'm like, yeah, you really don't use that protein powder. I don't know. It just feels inauthentic, and yeah. So I'm trying to stay away from that.
You're not selling out.
Hopefully not.
Any other questions? That was a good question.
Over here? Did he have a question? No? No. No. Anybody, anything? Yeah.
How's the best way to just even start thinking or going vegan?
Oh. Wow. Well, I think that educating yourself, and there's so much information online now, whatever your interest is, like if you came in because you're worried about global warming, then maybe going that environmental route and learning about the environmental issues. There's starting slow with recipes. If you're familiar with, like if you make lasagna all the time, maybe you Google vegan lasagna and get a recipe for vegan lasagna and just veganize your lasagna that you already do. So familiar recipes, taking it slow, but steady. And now there's so many options as far as, you could eat out all the time, and it didn't used to be that way. You had to cook. Now you don't have to cook. So yeah. Anybody else? Anything? Yeah.
What do you think of lab-grown meat?
Her question was, what do you think of lab-grown meat? Woo, okay, how much time do we have?
That's a podcast.
Yeah, right? Well, I don't know if I want to touch it, honestly. It's very controversial in the vegan movement, and I get it. I see both sides. I'm kind of like this, with it. I see the side where it's like, yeah, we need a lot of tools in the toolbox. We need plant-based foods. We need this. We need that. It's good to have a lot of tools to work with. However, the flip side and what the argument is against it is that, it is still commodifying animals. It is still an animal product. It is actually animals. You take a cell from the animal. You have to have a live cow somewhere, available for the lab to take from. So, I kind of get it. I feel like also too, if the world just goes to, whatever, and we slip back away from this vegan thing, that would make it easier to just go back to meat eating, because we haven't really established a vegan ethic, that we don't commodify animals and that animals deserve to live free from our scraping their skin for cells, So I don't know. Again, I'm not arguing one side or the other. I kind of dance between. I see both sides. It's an interesting issue.
All right, well,
That's
we're
it?
closing it up here. I wanted to ask you guys a question, and this is kind of a first answer that I received. And I'm giving away the Ultimate Betrayal book.
My book.
And so my question is, how many gallons of water does it take to produce 1 pound of beef?
I know a quarter pound is like 620 something.
I'm bad at math, so what would that be?
Maybe like
2,400.
Ah.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yee, good job.
Take whatever, but good job.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Hope. Wonderful. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you.
We're all going to be checking out the podcast, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we liked it and everything, and tell our friends. So, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. So
What you need?
stay tuned,
Want to stand there?
very shortly.